Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast. We cover everything Major League, from spring training to the World Series. We've got your favorite club covered, from New York to Boston to LA. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast.
Hello and welcome in to another edition of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Kevin Mahalik, and today's episode is episode number 237 of the Baseball Podcast. That's right, episode 237 here on Thursday, August 13th. I appreciate you guys tuning in today. Hopefully you're enjoying your week out there. Today and yesterday have been a little bit better for us as sports fans. Tuesday was a bit difficult with college football coming out, the Big Ten and the Pac-12 shutting down fall sports, basically shutting down football. However, the ACC, SEC, and Big 12 said they're going to power forward as of this time and try to play in the fall. So who knows what's going on there, but around the other sports, the NBA, the NHL, Major League Baseball, they have games from pretty much 1 p.m. until midnight every day. So it's a great time to be a sports fan. It's a great time to be a baseball fan as we're starting to charge ahead here. I looked down the other day, realized teams are 18 games in here at this point, 19 games, depending on when you're listening to this recording. And that's almost a third of the way through. So we're, it's getting late quick, like they like to say in baseball. You kind of hit Memorial Day typically early on. That's the first kind of poll, so to speak, of, hey, how are we doing? You get Memorial Day, then you get July 4th, are kind of the two there heading into the trade deadline. Well, we're essentially at that July 4th mark now. We skipped Memorial Day. We went right to July 4th, usually a few weeks before the trade deadline, which is coming up here at the end of August. We're going to get into some potential targets who may move later on in the third segment of today's episode. But here off the top of the show, you guys know the routine. We're talking news and notes. And recently it's come out that Major League Baseball is considering a playoff bubble, quote unquote. The NBA and the NHL have both installed the bubble operation. The NBA went with one huge bubble. The NHL went with two smaller bubbles. And that's where it gets a little bit difficult for Major League Baseball, because they are more or less going to need three bubbles, or at least the opportunity to play within three different facilities within a single bubble. So it's not quite the Orlando, everybody's playing in one gym, or even the NHL, hey, you're in Edmonton, you're in Toronto, it's one arena, to and from, here's the deal. It's much more complicated when it comes to Major League Baseball. Now, on the surface level, I have to say, I am all for this. I mean, we've seen with zero positive tests, both in the NBA and NHL, that the bubble environment does work in containing the coronavirus. Obviously, this wouldn't have worked with baseball due to local revenue, players being away from their families for an extended period of time, for all those different reasons. But none of those issues are issues anymore when it comes to the postseason, because all of those games are nationally broadcast. They're no longer brought to you by your local Comcast provider or local Fox Sports provider or whoever your local team, you watch every night on the television around here. It's NBC Sports, Comcast, that provides us with the Phillies. But I know the Yankees, the Mets, SNY, all those different types of networks, they don't get the national playoff games, so you don't have to worry about that particular revenue, advertising, and that rabbit hole that they had to go down during the regular season. And then the time period about being away from your significant others, partners, families. Well, since it's the postseason, you're looking at what, 3 weeks tops, 4 weeks tops? And if you get eliminated in the first round, a week at the longest. Now, the hard part would be logistically making it make sense, because coming from each individual city into a centralized quarantined bubble, I believe they're getting tested once every 3 days now, twice a week. maybe they up that coming down the stretch because the NBA and the NHL both did a 10-day quarantine upon arrival, and now baseball wouldn't be able to do that since they'd be playing days after wherever they were at the end of the regular season. So maybe the last week of the regular season, you up testing to every day to teams that are going to make the postseason, and that way you can continue the next day with the knowledge that everybody is negative. But again, back to the fact that you need multiple facilities to make this happen is due to the expanded playoffs. Now they have 16 playoff teams, and if you're looking at games per day, this means that you could have upwards of 8 games in a day, probably closer to 4, but it could be 5, 6, or 7, depending on the length of each series, upwards of 8 total. And thus, if you're going 3 triple headers per day, 1 o'clock, 4:30, 8 o'clock type of time frame for these games, kind of like the NHL is doing, that's only 6 games at 2 different facilities. So either you would have to break down the schedule to play a maximum of 3 games at each location, and that way you could do major metropolitan cities such as New York, LA, or Chicago. Those are the 3 that have been tossed around right now because they're, again, discussing the use of 3 facilities. These cities only have 2 in them, with LA, the Dodgers and the Angels, Chicago, the Cubs, White Sox, New York, the Mets and Yankees, obviously there. But the third wheel aspect, and the closest one logistically to those 3, are adding San Diego to the LA bubble, then adding Milwaukee into the Chicago bubble, and then adding Philadelphia into the New York bubble. All of those are within driving distance of each other. All of those are only a couple of hours, so players could easily navigate between all 3 facilities depending on where they would have to play, because we're looking at neutral site. Again, it wouldn't be a home field advantage. There's no fans. There would be the home team, so it would be a neutral site game. And everybody who's talked about this year has basically said home field isn't really a thing anymore. Maybe you get the home clubhouse, your home bed, as opposed to a hotel. But in regards to the playing atmosphere, sound, noise, all of that stuff, there's nothing going on in 2020, so it really wouldn't matter where you're playing or which team it is. I mean, if you got the Braves and Cubs playing each other at Yankee Stadium, so be it. Why not? It's 2020. We've seen crazier things. We might as well jump into that one as well. But I'm all for the playoff bubble. I think it's the best way to make sure that the postseason happens. We've obviously learned there have been outbreaks within the Marlins, within the Cardinals, and then potentially within the Indians. I'll get into that here in just 1 second. But, you got to do the bubble as much as you can. It would only be a couple of weeks away from your family. Local television revenue wouldn't be a problem. So I really don't see much pushback from the players as they've seen the success of the NBA and NHL bubbles, of course, throughout these past couple of weeks. But talking about the Indians' potential outbreak, let's jump right into that as we continue around. But Indians pitchers Clevinger and Plesac decided to go out in the city of Chicago on Saturday night following their game just to meet up with some friends, go have some dinner, do their thing outside of the hotel. And the Indians found out about it and sent these 2 guys home. They said, hey, you can't even come back. We're not flying you home. You guys need to rent a car, get back to Cleveland, quarantine by yourself for at least 72 hours until you're allowed to join the team again. And Clevinger missed his start because of it. They had to skip his turn in the rotation due to his decision-making. And teammates came out and did not speak highly of it. They were very critical of those 2, potentially going out, risking positive coronavirus infection, bringing it back into the clubhouse. We've seen how quickly it can spread within a clubhouse, within the team itself. Now, luckily, again, it hasn't spread from team to team, even while playing, but inside their own clubhouse, it spread like wildfire. So other players who are abiding by the rules or are abiding by the regulations, they are very upset with these 2. And it's a shame because these 2 are some of the top performers for the Indians, but they're going to be out for at least a week now, and hopefully that dinner was worth it. I mean, I get it. Personally, as a human side of things, as a fan, stay in the hotel. It's not that hard. Do your thing. But as a human who knows Major League Baseball players and meets up with them when they're on the road after games, they only travel to certain cities, you can only do certain things during certain times, that's fun for them as well, because a lot of times it's monotonous. It's a machine. You don't know where you are. You don't know what city you're in. You're playing 3 games. You're in a suitcase. You pack up, airport, hotel. It's fall asleep, back to the stadium, suitcase, airport, hotel. It's like where am I? What day is it? What time of the month is it? What's going on? It's, you can kind of ground yourself as a player. But again, 2020 is just not the time to go about doing anything along those lines. And I can certainly see how that's frustrating from a player's perspective. But the Indians aren't playing any games. They sent those guys home and suspended them for a week here. So stay tuned on whether or not they're allowed to return following some negative tests here. But A's outfielder Lariano, the suspension came out for him in regards to their altercation or his altercation with the Houston Astros over the weekend. He got suspended for 6 games. He is currently appealing that suspension. While you're appealing a suspension, you can continue to play. So that's why you'll see his name in the lineup for the next couple of days until ultimately they determine the final ruling on his suspension. Astros hitting coach Cintrone, he got the largest suspension in the last 15 years in regards to an on-the-field action, not steroids, not things like that. He got 20 games, and he's sitting those right away. Once again, you kind of multiply that by 2.5, almost 3. You're looking at like a 50-game suspension for what took place. So MLB not fooling around. You thought a week or two ago when the Astros got into it a bit with the Dodgers, potentially the 6 games for Kelly for not even hitting a guy would have been a warning shot for Major League Baseball to, hey, knock it off, don't do this. Well, Lariano didn't listen. He gets the same suspension as Kelly. So there's a bit of, consistency there from Major League Baseball. And then they obviously thought Cintrone escalated things, which isn't the move currently from a hitting coach's perspective in the dugout. So he gets 20 games and he is out for the foreseeable future. But now talking about some of these new rules. Let's wrap up this first segment here. Diving in now that it's been a couple of weeks. Where are we at? What do we think? How have they been implemented? And let's start out with the extra inning rule. So I did some digging and did some research out there. And in 2019, there were 208 extra inning games. All right, so 208 extra inning games last year. And this year there were 16 through Monday. I was only able to go through Monday's game. I know there were quite a few on Tuesday. The Phillies played one. Somebody else played one. That one went 10 innings, so I don't have the math. But again, you guys will get it here, so follow along. But in 2019, these extra inning games that finished in 10 innings, so only went 10, there were 91 of the 208 games, which is good for 43.8%. So 43.8% of all extra inning games ended in 10 innings. Well, in 2020, that number is 9 out of 16, which is 56.3% of all games. So a 13% increase in games that end after 10 innings. Now, one step further here and ending games after 11 innings, which is ultimately the goal for Major League Baseball, looking back to last year, 149 out of 208. That is 71.6% of extra inning games ended after 11 innings. Back to 2020. 14 out of 16. We've had 2 13-inning games, but 14 out of 16 have ended at least after 11 innings, and that is 87.5%. So upwards of a 16 percentage increase there. So almost 9 out of 10 games that go to extra innings are ending now in the 10th or 11th inning with this rule of adding a runner to second base. So yes, it is accomplishing what it is supposed to. We are no longer having these 17, 18-inning marathon, 14, 15 innings where position players are coming in and they're pitching and all of that stuff that everybody loves to point out. Hey, it's a school night. It's now 12:30 and I'm watching a position player. This isn't even baseball anymore. So it is very gimmicky. It is very high school AAU. Again, the Phillies did it for the first time on Tuesday. That was really the first time, a team I was rooting for was watching it. They gave up 2 runs in the top of the 10th. They only scored 1 run themselves in the bottom of the 10th and lost 10-9. So it was exciting. It was runs. It was action. It is certainly much better to go to the 11th inning having both teams scored a run in the 10th inning as opposed to your standard strikeout, home run, swing for all or nothing that everybody loves to do nowadays, or I guess did in 2019. So I think it's working. I think you're getting more consistent at-bats from the major league hitters, more people willing to go the other way, more people looking for singles, get on base, walks, as opposed to the all or nothing home run, which even watching the game is just more entertaining. So I do believe the runner on second base is working. That doesn't mean I'm in love with it, but for what it's trying to accomplish, it has certainly been successful. And then wrapping up the first segment here, talking about the designated hitter rule in the National League. Surprising results early on. I got to be honest with you guys. I looked at some numbers again. In 2019, National League pitchers hit a combined 131, so .131 offensively with a 43% strikeout rate. So basically struck out half the time, got a hit every 13 out of 100 plate appearances. Wasn't very good. And we expected this to increase with professional hitters now taking this at bat. Well, DHs in the National League across the board are only hitting 208 early on. So what is happening? Do the rosters, were they not built yet to the point where they have skilled hitters who can't even play a lick of defense, so the extra hitters who you had on your bench are more defensive oriented because that's the way you've put your roster together over years past, and we haven't seen the flip or the advocation of money towards a Nelson Cruz or somebody on the American League side who all they can do is hit, but do so extremely well. Maybe Jose Abreu, kind of for the Chicago White Sox. I don't know. But for National League DHs to only be hitting 208, I was surprised by that now that we're, a month in here. I didn't have the strikeout rate for them, but still, only hitting 208. What's going on there? I couldn't figure it out. But that'll wrap things up here for the first segment of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. We'll pause right now for a word from one of our sponsors and one of our sister shows, but when we come back, we're going to get into the top performers of 2020. It's time, ladies and gentlemen. Some of my partners here within the Baseball Podcast have given their MVP candidates early on. I'm going to touch on it, but we're going to basically talk about the guys who have come out of the gates hot and really performed here. So stick around, everybody. I am Kevin Mahalik. This is the GSMC Baseball Podcast. We'll be right back.
This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
Thanks again for listening to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Kevin Mahalik. Today is Thursday, August 13th, and this is episode number 237 of the Baseball Podcast. If you guys haven't done so already, head to Twitter. Give us a follow. We appreciate it. I myself, as well as all the other hosts here at the Baseball Podcast, have access to our Twitter account. We like to keep you guys updated every night on the action, what's going on, giving our takes on everything live time. So you can follow us there, check us out. We also have a Facebook page where you can get links to all the episodes of the Baseball Podcast, as well as articles and our thoughts that are being written out there. It's pretty cool. So head to social media, Facebook, Twitter, give us a like, give us a follow. We really appreciate it, as well as head to GSMC Podcast Network, not just the baseball page, but the podcast network, our parent company there. We very much appreciate it, and we appreciate you guys listening here today. But jumping into our second segment, we're going to talk about the top performers here early on. I know some of my partners have been talking about the early MVP and Cy Young candidates. It's a little too early for me yet to kind of put the awards on the performances early on, because the gambling sites and the odds makers haven't yet reflected or reacted to the early pushes from a lot of candidates here early on. I mean, just for example, we're going to get into it in more detail, but Charlie Blackmon, who everybody knows is hitting 500 or better here early on, he's still plus 1,800 to win the NL MVP. He is 5th or 6th on the list, so he hasn't even jumped the top guys, even though he's performing like the top guy in the league so far. So the casinos and the odds makers haven't reacted yet to the opening push, so I'm just going to talk about those guys and their performances as opposed to, I think, who the favorites are, because the favorites and the top performers so far are going to be different individuals. So early on, jumping into the American League, let's go to the offense right away. We'll go American League and then over to the National League. But in the American League, the current batting champion would be DJ LeMahieu for the New York Yankees. He's hitting 400 with 2 home runs and 7 RBIs. He's got 24 hits and 60 at-bats. Is there a potential chance for him to hit 400 or finish the year hitting 400? Man, it'd be tough. I mean, this guy is one excellent hitter. I mean, he's got 5 walks and 6 strikeouts. So the guy just doesn't strike out. He puts the ball in play. He takes advantages of mistakes. 1 double, 2 home runs, so only 3 extra base hits out of 24. So a slap singles guy. It could be possible, but personally, I think he finds himself somewhere in that 350 range. I think he definitely is the favorite to win the American League batting title once again based on the start here early on. But I don't think 400 is in reach like it could potentially be on the National League side. So Kyle Lewis is second in the league at 357. He's been fantastic for Seattle. He's the only reason why they're not completely as bad as the Pirates on the National League side. He's got 4 homers, 13 RBIs. Again, hitting 357. Hanser Alberto for Baltimore. Now, all of these stats, again, I'll put a little asterisk here. These are through Tuesday night's action, Tuesday's games. I'm recording this a little bit earlier on Wednesday than I typically do, just to some commitments later on in the evening here. So this hasn't been updated yet with Wednesday night's action if you're listening to this here on Thursday. But Alberto in Philadelphia, he was very impressive. That was the first time I got to watch the Orioles and watch him swing the bat. He was 2 for 5, but he hit 4 balls right on the nose. He had a couple of doubles. He's hitting 348. He was all over the field, right center, left center. He was hitting off-speed fastballs. You could certainly see why early on he's one of the best hitters in the American League. Then you got Carlos Correa hitting 333 down there in Houston. A good, strong start for him in 17 games. He's been able to stay healthy, 4 doubles, 2 home runs, so you have to be happy early on with where Carlos is, bouncing back from some injury concerns in the past. He's been banged up, so a bit of an issue there. But Nelson Cruz, 328. Mike Trout has been electric since he's returned. He's hitting 322 with 7 homers and 14 RBIs. He's got homers in, I think, 6 in his last 7 games since he's come back. He's second in the league in home runs. That currently goes to Aaron Judge, who has 9 home runs and 20 RBIs. He's leading the American League in RBIs as well. Again, in second place, you got Kyle Seager. Nelson Cruz is there. Eddie Rosario in Minnesota, since they score a ton of runs out there. But just, these guys here, when I say American League MVP, Trout is obviously the favorite. Aaron Judge is right behind him. But you still get the names of Francisco Lindor, Chapman are still ahead of all of these guys. LeMahieu isn't an MVP type, even if he hits around 400. I don't know if Alberto's going to have the power numbers at the top. Lewis would really be the one jumping off with 4 and 13, hitting 357. But if Trout finishes anywhere near his 7-14, 322 pace, you can pretty much just sign over that American League MVP to Mike and go about your day. So transitioning now into the National League and the talk of Major League Baseball, Charlie Blackmon, he is hitting 500 at this point. He is 34 for 68, and one of the most fascinating statistical lines that I just recently found out as I was doing some research is Blackmon started 0 for 9 to start out the year. So think about that. So that means he is 34 for his last 59, which is good for a 576 batting average. So the guy didn't even start out hot. He started as cold as you could get opening weekend. Since then, he's hitting 576. He's only struck out 8 times He's got 5 walks, 6 doubles, 3 home runs, so 9 extra base hits out of those 34. It has been so impressive to watch this guy. 721 slugging. He's got a 1248 OPS, where anything over 1,000 is something to write home about. It is just fascinating to see. And then this next guy, I'll be honest with you, I haven't seen him play a game yet. I mean, Donovan Solano out in San Francisco, myself being a Philadelphia guy, East Coast guy, I haven't caught much of the Giants-Dodgers games that have been on, and if I have, it's been an inning or two, and typically I've been just watching for the Dodgers. If the Giants are hitting, I'm going, I don't really care about any of those guys. But Solano's hitting 458, so can he continue that pace? It'll be fascinating to see. He's only got 9 strikeouts. He's got 9 doubles and 1 home run for 10 extra base hits out of 27. So not only is he hitting for singles, he's hitting for power with an OPS of 1,137. It's crazy, man. And then you also got the guy we talked about last episode, Fernando Tatis Jr. 8 home runs, 18 RBIs. He's hitting 333. He's got an OPS of 1157. He is a leader in the clubhouse when it comes to early NL MVP candidates. But again, these don't match up with the early odds makers, because on the National League side, you have Betts still at the top of the list as the favorite for the MVP candidate, and he's not hitting for the best average currently at 281. I mean, that's just fine, but he's currently sitting at 24th in the National League in batting average. Tatis Jr. has made the push all the way up to second at plus 733. So that's your early bet like we talked about. But you got Acuna at plus 800. Maybe that drops because he's just scratched on Tuesday with a wrist ailment. So how long is he going to miss? Is he going to be healthy when he comes back? You got Castellanos, who had an early power surge for the Cincinnati Reds and finds himself with 7 home runs and 16 RBIs, hitting 290 early on here. And then Blackmon, like I said, at plus 1,800. So you got Tatis at plus 700, Blackmon at plus 1,800, and those guys are all over the top of the individual, statistics board here. Looking at the home run side of things, like we said, Tatis at the top with 8, Castellanos next with 7. RBIs, it's the same list here. We got Blackmon with 20, Tatis, and then Castellanos below him. And Charlie Blackmon, being in Colorado, being in Denver, the Rockies have had 8 batting league champions. I think 8 different people have won 11 batting titles over the course of the last 25 or 30 years. Somebody out there listening, double check me on that. Let me know how far off I am, but it's true. Coors, NL, Denver, it works. I mean, 11 different batting titles in 25 years. The Phillies haven't had one in like 30 years. So Coors has something to do with it. But it'll be fascinating to see because Blackmon is a fantastic hitter. So, hang on. We'll see how long he can hold up for that 500 mark. But he's the first guy to be hitting 500 or better through the first 17 team games since Barry Bonds did it back in that video game year of 04. So it's been fun to watch, man. Flick on some Rockies games if you haven't done so yet already. But let's transition onto the mound now. Going back over to the American League, who are the early surprises? There's quite a few on the list here. I mean, at the top of it has to be Randy Dobnak, who's leading the league in ERA at .90 through 4 starts in 20 innings. I mean, I don't know where he came from or what he's doing before his time in Minnesota, but the guy has been very, very impressive with what's going on. I mean, he was there last year. He came up at the end of the year, so he's continued over that success, and shout out to Randy. Next up, you got Lance Lynn, who's 2-0 with a 1.16 in 4 starts over 23 innings. Man, just super impressive to watch Lance Lynn do what he's doing after he left the Twins in 2018. He's been one of the best pitchers in all of baseball, and he was just so-so during his time in Minnesota. Next up, you got Plesac, who was recently sent home, like we talked about in the first segment. 1.29 ERA. Frankie Montas out in Oakland. This is a gentleman I had never heard his name before the 2020 season. So Frankie Montas, 4 starts, 1.57 ERA. He's been dealing out there in Oakland. And then Dylan Bundy. He finds himself at the top of the list here, 3-1 in 4 starts. And the Angels are still struggling. Imagine if Dylan Bundy wasn't performing. They'd be even worse than where they are right now. He's, Shane Bieber, 1.63. 3-0 in 4 starts. Then you got Spencer Turnbull for Detroit, a 2.0 ERA in 3 starts early on. Man, it is just fun to watch some of these guys throw the ball. Other surprises have to be Alex Cobb, and you're going to hear these names in a bit here coming up as we talk about potential trade candidates in the next segment here. Some of these guys are a specific carryover, but who's leading the league in strikeouts? Shane Bieber is with 43, Dylan Bundy with 35, Lance Lynn with 30 after that. So Garrett Cole currently in 5th place with only 26 strikeouts through 4 starts. A bit of a down pace for Garrett when it comes to his strikeouts early on. But let's go to the National League now. Trevor Bauer leads the league in ERA, .93 through 3 starts. He's the only gentleman with a complete game early on. Or no, Max Scherzer has a complete game, as well as Kyle Hendricks. Those 3 are the only guys in the National League. Next up is John Lester. Wow, John Lester just continues to do it. I would have certainly not bet on Lester performing this well early on in this season. Through 3 starts, 1.06 ERA. He's 2-0 for the Cubs. He's not striking out a lot of people anymore, but is pitching to contact, pitching in all 4 quadrants, all different speeds. He has certainly turned himself from a flamethrower who used to be 95 from the left side to more of a pitcher with that cutter in the low 90s, and is very effective. Adam Wainwright's another guy who's been doing it for a long time. He's only had 1 start, but he's got a 1.5 ERA. Max Fried in Atlanta, 4 starts. He's got a 1.59 ERA. He's 3-0 from the left side. He's been very impressive. I watched him deal against the Phillies the other night. He carved them up, make them look pretty silly. Let's see. Then we got Denelson Lamet that we talked about. Almost had a no-no the other day. He's 2-0 in 4 starts, a 1.61 ERA. German Marquise for Colorado. Yu Darvish has been excellent for the Cubbies, 2.12 through 3 starts. Sonny Gray, Merrill Kelly, Kyle Freeland, and then Jacob deGrom, Patrick Corbin. Now you get into some of the names you know, all the way down in the teens here when it comes to ERA. As we look over to strikeouts here in the National League, on the bump so far, Sonny Gray leads the National League with 35 through 4 starts. Next up, Trevor Bauer, 32, and then Luis Castillo with 31. So your top 3 strikeout guys in the National League are all in the Cincinnati Reds rotation. They got 4 starts, 3 starts, 4 starts. So let's see, 11 total starts and 98 strikeouts, averaging 9 per start for the top guys there. Next, you have Aaron Nola, Max Scherzer. Nice to see Nola up there. He's got a 29-2 ratio, which is tops here for the board, 32-4. Trevor Bauer has an excellent ratio, but Aaron Nola has been fantastic here on the early going. He's 1-1 with a 2.79 ERA, but those strikeouts are certainly 2017-like, 2018-like, unless 2019 where he's been struggling to put guys away when it comes to 2 strikes or later in the year. So there aren't any odds yet here for the National League or American League Cy Young I could find out there for you guys like there were for the MVP. But I just found it interesting that some of the top performers, when you look at the statistical categories, aren't those that are currently your favorites for the awards. Mike Trout, yes, of course. Judge, sure. But Lindor and Chapman, I don't know. Potentially time to fade them when it comes to the odds. And then on the NL side, Blackmon plus 1,800, Tatis plus 733, but Betts, Acuna, those 2 guys playing well, but certainly not to the level of the other gentlemen. But that'll wrap it up here for the second segment of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. We'll pause right now for a word from one of our sponsors and one of our sister shows, but when we come back, I know it's early and it's over 3 weeks away, or just about 3 weeks away, but let's talk about the trade deadline. Let's talk about guys who could potentially be on the move. There's some interesting names, and it's very, very pitcher heavy. So I am Kevin Mahalik. This is the GSMC Baseball Podcast. We'll be right back.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Thanks again for listening to today's episode of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Kevin Mahalik. Today is episode number 237 of the Baseball Podcast, and this is the third segment where we are talking early trade deadline targets. That's right, it's only August 13th, but that means we're less than 3 weeks away from the trade deadline, and we're chugging right ahead towards it. Now, you're probably thinking to yourself, I don't think there's going to be any trades this year. And I was of that thinking as well early on as I was, going through topics or potential topics of discussion for today's episode. I found myself being like, hey, talk about the trade deadline. You haven't done that yet. Well, nobody's going to be traded because nobody's going to want to give up any assets for 20 games and potentially that's it moving forward. Well, the flip side of that, however, is the expanded playoff now comes into consideration. The fact that more teams are going to make the playoffs, I think makes more teams willing to add during the trade deadline. Now, I do believe this limits the amount of quote-unquote sellers we would have in Major League Baseball. I think you would really have to be out of the race, still obviously looking towards next year and developing, and I do think it's somebody that would have to be a free agent or somebody you're not looking to pay here moving forward. So the teams that we're looking at potentially moving on from some players, teams like the Royals, the Angels, the Rangers, the Giants, the Pirates, the Tigers, the Mariners, the Red Sox, the Diamondbacks, all of these teams that find themselves really on the outside looking in here, even with the expanded playoffs like we've talked about, and we're going to discuss even more here in the fourth and final segment coming up. But these teams really can still move on from these guys because they're most likely going to walk anyway in free agency. So will the return be what it would normally be during a regular season? No, I don't think it will. I don't think you're going to have anybody give up a top 15 prospect, a top 20, 25 prospect for any of these guys. But should you take a flyer on a single A kid? Should you take a lottery ticket for a guy in low A ball who isn't even playing this summer, but you liked when he was coming out of the draft a few years ago in the 20th round? Yeah, I think you should. I think the Phillies need to add bullpen help. I think the Yankees need to add rotational help if they truly want to go for it and make a run. There are teams that are on the bubble or teams such as the Yankees at the top that can still improve themselves. And again, they're not going to give up anything, but I think on the other side, the teams trading these individuals know that, and the asking price will be much, much less because it is 20 games. And if you're the Royals, Pirates, or Tigers, I mean, yeah, the Tigers are still kind of in it. I think they're going to fade, so I'm speaking a little bit out of context there. But I do think that they fade and move on from people because they are thinking long-term, and even if the postseason, they're not going to make a run, but that's neither here nor there. Let's get into some of these names, all right, shall we? Let's start out on the pitching side of things because this is where the majority of the list is. Honestly, going through rosters, going through potential individuals who fit the bill within those specific teams, a lot of it is pitching, and that makes a ton of sense. So, we'll start there on the mound at the top. These are in no particular order. I don't think it's likelihood. It's not alphabetical. I was just kind of going through writing names down, so we're going to be jumping around here a little bit. But first off, I had Danny Duffy, a left-handed pitcher for the Kansas City Royals. He's been there for about 10 years now. Let's see, looking at his statistics in the past 2 years, not as good as the years before that. 4.34 ERA last year, 4.88 the year before, 5.12 through 4 starts this year. But 2016 and 17, he had ERAs in the mid-threes. So he's certainly a a value piece for a contender. I think the likes of the Yankees could go after somebody like this. He's not going to be an ace. He's not going to be a difference maker, a number one or number two. But if you're looking for depth pieces, which the Yankees are behind Garrett Cole and on down because J.A. Happ's been struggling, James Paxton's been struggling, I think you could plug in Danny Duffy there and not have a problem. The only issue is that he's owed $15.5 million next year. So he has one more year on his contract with that amount of money for that amount of production means he's going to have to go to a high-value market team who's taking on that money, which means they're giving up even less in return to Kansas City unless they're willing to swallow some of that cash to get better prospects. But that $15 million could be a cliffhanger here for this summer. But Danny Duffy's somebody I think that could make a difference in the rotation for one of those top-level teams looking for a number 3, 4, or 5 coming down the stretch. This next guy fits the same category. Alex Cobb, Baltimore Orioles, right-handed starting pitcher. He was in Tampa Bay before he found his way to Baltimore. Let's see here. ERA the last 2 years. Last year he only started 3 games, so we'll go off the 2 years before that. He went 4.9 and 3.6. So a solid starting pitcher. I mean, this year he's got a 2.75 ERA in 4 starts for Baltimore. So he's really shown early on that he's healthy once again. 17 walks to 8 strikeouts through those 4 starts. Baltimore is still in contention here as we're talking on August 13th. But if they find themselves slipping down the ladder a little bit, this could be somebody they move on from in the next couple of weeks to get a return on investment because, again, the Yankees, the Phillies, maybe even the Mets who have lost Stroman, Thor, looking at starting pitching, Alex Cobb could potentially be an investment. Now, Cobb does have one more year and $15 million himself lined up for 2021, but at the pace he is at, it certainly looks like you would favor Cobb over Duffy if you were to offer the same packages for both of those guys. So contending teams most likely looking at Cobb before Duffy, but the price of $15 million next year makes things interesting. This next guy we've heard for the past couple of years, off-season, summer, it doesn't matter. We've heard his name being floated around, and that's Robbie Ray of the Arizona Diamondbacks, left-handed starting pitcher. The only difference between this year and years past is that Ray's really struggling. Last year, 4.34 ERA. Year before that, 3.93. Year before that, 2.81. And then this year, through 4 starts, 10.59. So 14 walks already in 17 innings. He just can't find the strike zone. 23 strikeouts. You know, he's got electric stuff still, but having control concerns, issues. I mean, man, I haven't seen him throw live. I'm going to be honest with you guys. I haven't seen him myself to discuss kind of the detail, but just knowing the surface level, and that's one of the main reasons why Arizona finds themselves in the basement. So if he can't figure it out, he'll have to stick around in Arizona, but he's a future free agent after this year. If Arizona's still in the basement and you want to throw a single-A pitcher at me for Robbie Ray for 4 starts, sure. I'll take that if I'm the Arizona Diamondbacks. Why not? He's going to leave anyway. These next couple of guys are guys that are pitching themselves potentially onto the trade deadline. A couple of L.A. Angels, since they're in the basement of the AL West, as we're currently talking here. First off, you got Dylan Bundy, who's completely reinvented himself out in L.A. since his time with the Orioles. I mean, the last 3 years, 4.79, 5.45, 4.24, and now in L.A. after 4 starts, he's got a 1.57 ERA. So these guys have one more year of arbitration. So Dylan Bundy is under team control next year for a cheap amount of money before he would become a free agent. So that ups his price just a little bit. But again, I don't know how much weight you can put on 4, what do we got, 3 weeks? So maybe 6, 7 starts as opposed to 30 and 31, where the track record says you're going to get about a 5 ERA. Now you're looking at an ERA under 2. So is this smoke and mirrors, or is this a different Dylan Bundy? I mean, 3 walks to 35 strikeouts, that's fascinating. That means your stuff's electric, you're in the zone, you're pounding the zone, you're attacking hitters, and it's fun to watch. So be on the lookout for Dylan Bundy. His price may be a bit too high for what people are willing to pay, but another year of control, if you get somebody to bite on it, it could be an option. His fellow teammate Andrew Heaney out there in L.A. as well. He's been out there for a handful of years. He's off to a decent start in 4 starts. He's got a 4.26 ERA. That's kind of along the normal there. 4.91, 4.15 past couple of years for him. So 4-2-6, I don't know, left side if you're looking to add a lefty to the rotation. Maybe the Philadelphia Phillies don't have anybody on that side. Could give up a lower level prospect. He also has a year of arbitration control left, so he could be difficult to pull away from L.A. Continuing around here, the guys down in Texas, Lance Lynn. We talked about how he's dealing early on. He's got one more year at $10 million, which means I don't think he's going anywhere. I think Texas holds on to him with hopes of contending next year. But Mike Minor, on the other hand, left-handed starting pitcher who will be a free agent after the offseason. Through 4 starts, he's struggling, 5.49 ERA, so his price could be extremely low, and we've heard his name in the past, back when he had a 2.55 ERA and 3.59. So it's been in there before. The potential is there. It's just a matter of if Texas is willing to move on from Minor or ultimately what they're looking to get out of him moving forward. These last 4 guys we'll run through quickly here as we wrap up our pitching conversation. But Kevin Gausman, now out in San Francisco after his time bouncing around. He was in Atlanta, then Cincinnati. He was in Baltimore. But out in San Fran, through 4 starts, 4.05 ERA. He'll be a free agent after the year. So if San Fran's looking to move on, get some young guys innings, Gausman could probably be had for a decent price. Same could be said for Johnny Cueto. Johnny's got one more year and another $21 million left on his deal. His ERA was in the 5s last year, 3 the year before that. He can't stay healthy, so that price tag probably keeps him off the market. But he's pitched in big games. He's won awards. If you want a veteran, he could be an option. Joe Musgrove for the Pittsburgh Pirates. He's got 2 years of arbitration left, but Pittsburgh always moving on, as well as Joe's really struggling. 6.75 ERA in 3 games so far. His ERA has been in the 4 during his entire professional career. So I don't know if anybody's going to give up anything for that. But the last guy, Matthew Boyd. Man, what is going on with Matthew Boyd? He was one of the most talked about trade candidates during the offseason, the All-Star break, left-handed, electric stuff. But through 3 starts, he's got a 9.2 ERA. And nobody's giving up anything for a 9.2 ERA. They basically say, hey, we'll pay him the rest of the way, but we're not going to give you anything for him. So honestly, the likeliest candidates I could see moving now at this point would be Robbie Ray from the Diamondbacks, Alex Cobb potentially, but his contract makes it a little difficult. Maybe Gausman from the Giants are the top 2. There's not many arms here that are difference makers to be moved. And the same could be said about the position players. Let's talk about a handful of those guys here as we're wrapping up our trade talk segment. Starting off with Jackie Bradley Jr. of the Boston Red Sox. I think the Red Sox could move on from a couple of pieces as they fade further and further back in the American League East. Jackie Bradley Jr. is a free agent next year, so that's why I think he could be moved from Boston. He's spent his entire 8-year career in Boston so far, off to a bit of a slow start, but maybe right on his career pace. I mean, last year he hit 225, the year before 234, 245 the year before that, and then this year through 16 games hitting 224 with no home runs and only 2 doubles. So the price for Jackie Bradley Jr. is going to be low, potentially maybe a defensive replacement in the National League. I don't know. Just look at his statistics. I don't think anybody's going to give up anything for Bradley Jr., but I do think he's a key candidate to get moved. So if there's a team right around 500 that doesn't have anybody out there in center field and is looking for a veteran clubhouse presence to kind of stabilize things down the stretch, maybe you make the move there. But the price, I don't believe, would be very high at all. Next up on the list, we have Whit Merrifield for the Kansas City Royals. He's got 2 years left on his deal for a total of about $8 million. He's owed $6 million and then $2 million. He could potentially be a nice pickup for teams. In 2019, he hit 302. In 2018, he hit 304, 288 the year before that. This year, he's hitting 292, so a very good hitter. I mean, you know what you're getting from Whit Merrifield. You're going to get a good, solid hitter who gets on base, doesn't strike out a ton. A decent amount, but not a ton. And then kind of a doubles guy. 43 doubles, 41 doubles, not so much a home run, but a solid up-the-middle contributor. Now, Kansas City, if they think they're going to be able to contend over the next 2 years, I don't think moves on from Whit Merrifield, especially with what's happening with coronavirus. Since it is 2 years, I bet you they hold on to him until next summer and ultimately move him when he's got 1 year left of team control. But if you're a team out there looking for some offense and you can get Whit Merrifield, you probably make that move. You also got Sin-Shu Chu, who's got 10-5 rights during his time with the Texas Rangers. So he could waive any trade that's coming at him. He's a career 275 hitter. He's hit about 260, give or take, the last 3 years. This year he's starting off a bit slow down there in Texas, hitting 182. So it'll be kind of fascinating to see if he wants to move or if he wants to just play down there in Texas, because he'll be a free agent after the offseason. So maybe he wants to make a playoff run with somebody else getting exposure. But these last two are the two biggest names offensively, I think, that could be moved. Starting out with Kyle Seager of the Seattle Mariners. Kyle has 1 year, $18 million left for 2021 on his deal. He's been with Seattle now for 10 years, a career 257 hitter. Struggled the past 2 years, but is off to a nice start this year so far, hitting 309, 3 home runs, 6 doubles, potentially trying to play his way out of town. He knows this could be a trade year. He's a third baseman. There's some teams out there, maybe the Philadelphia Phillies. Gene Segura struggling a little bit. I know there's other contending teams who are looking for upgrades in the infield, and with an extra year of control, maybe Seattle can pull something out of the team that's looking to add Seager, as opposed to just getting a no-name guy, lower-level guy, since the return there will be greater than just the 20 games after the trade deadline. But Jock Peterson is the last guy on the list here. He'll be a free agent after this year, so whoever trades for him will only get 20 to 30 games out of him. A career 232 hitter. He hit about 250 the past couple of years when he got regular at-bats. This year he's only hitting 196. Does have 3 home runs here early on, but struggling to find his average stroke. And with L.A., with Mookie Betts, with everything going on out there, Cody Bellinger, Jock Peterson looks to be the odd man out. He looks like somebody's going to pay him more than the Dodgers can this offseason moving forward, which makes him a prime candidate to potentially be moved. But, I mean, looking at it, guys, overall, there's not a ton of names on here, not a ton of huge difference-making names, so I don't see any blockbuster trades happening. Robbie Ray, Alex Cobb, maybe Lance Lynn would be the best name out of the bunch. And then from the offensive side, Jackie Bradley Jr., Jock Peterson, Whit Merrifield, Kyle Seager. I mean, yeah, these guys are good ball players, but these aren't all-stars or not even the likes of Nick Castellanos moving across the city of Chicago last year. So it'll be fascinating to see if names heat up and more people become available as teams kind of stabilize here heading towards the end of August. But with 16 teams making the playoffs, I don't think enough of them are going to fade to the point where they'd be willing to sell. But that'll wrap it up for the third segment here of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. We'll pause one last time now for a word from one of our sponsors and one of our sister shows. But when we come back, we're going to give you guys an update on the standings, look at what the playoffs would look like if the year ended today. What matchups would we be getting? There's some interesting ones here, so stick around, everybody. Hi, I'm Kevin Mahalik. We'll be right back.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines, they got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Thanks again for listening to today's episode of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Kevin Mahalik. We've had a fantastic episode for you so far today. We talked about the MLB playoff bubble idea that is starting to be discussed, how I am in favor of this idea as much as possibly can be. Southern California is currently the early favorite in the clubhouse for the location, with the use of the Dodgers Stadium, the Angels Stadium, and San Diego, the Padres facilities as well there, all within driving distance of each other. I think that would be the best idea to give themselves the highest probability of completing the postseason. We've seen that increased travel increases potential risks, so the most that you can mitigate that, I think, is a fantastic idea. We also talked about the extra inning rule, about how it is being effective in shortening games. We then talked about all the top performers across the league, both offensively and defensively. Once again, the current odds makers have yet to ultimately react to some of the early hot streaks. Charlie Blackmon still has huge odds to be a National League MVP. Fernando Tatis is starting to close the gap, but you could still win a good amount of money if he stays hot and wins the award. So check that out with your local sports book. I know I use Rivers Casino. You've heard their ads here within the podcast network. I'm in the state of Pennsylvania, where it is since legal to gamble on sports, and Rivers has been fantastic to me. So I like to use Rivers Sports Casino for my gambling. I think I'm going to put some money down on Fernando Tatis, maybe $100 to win me $700 in a couple of weeks if he wins the MVP. But we then talked about trade deadline targets, how there really aren't any blockbuster names out there to be had. I think it'll be a lot of small, under-the-radar moves that could potentially be made. But look for some teams to fortify the rotation, because I think the value out there is in the arms, not so much the bats when it comes to this year's trade deadline. But wrapping up today's episode here in the fourth and final segment, I wanted to touch on the current Major League Baseball standings. Once again, these are after completion of Tuesday's games, because Wednesday night here I wasn't able to record late enough, so half the games would be in, half of them would not. So I figured, you know what, go off a Tuesday night. It'll be a heck of a lot easier to kind of communicate what's going on to the listeners out there. So instead of going division by division, which I've done in the past, I want to talk about the postseason and how things would currently shape up here as of the conclusion of August 11th game. So let's start out in the American League. Once again, the playoffs break down. Number 1 and number 2 in each division automatically qualify for the playoffs, and then there will be 2 wild card teams as well. I did not read the fine print, and I don't know if anybody's clarified this out there. So if you have, reach out to us on Facebook or Twitter or wherever you can interact with myself or the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Heck, put it in the comments. But wherever you're listening to this podcast, scroll up, give us 5 stars, and then write a review. In the review, answer this question for me. Where is it the first 3 divisional winners are seeds 1, 2, and 3, and then the runners-up are 4, 5, and 6? Or is it truly based on winning percentage? Now, it wouldn't change anything in regards to the current standings and how that would be laid out, 1 through 6, but it could eventually down the stretch. So I just want to make sure that we get that answer for you guys, the listeners out there, before it takes place. But here we go into the American League. Your division winners at this time: the Oakland Athletics, the New York Yankees, and the Minnesota Twins, in that order. The Athletics, then the Yankees, then the Twins. This is once again based off of winning percentage, since almost every different team has played a different number of games, and doing the math, I just went, hey, okay, I'm going to straight winning percentage in order to simplify things. So 1, 2, and 3, not a big issue there. Numbers 2 in each division are certainly surprises when it comes to the names here. You got the Detroit Tigers, the Tampa Bay Rays, and the Texas Rangers in that order. Now, the Tigers have a 600 winning percentage to be the top number 2 seed. The Rays at 556, but then you get the Rangers at under 500 with a lower winning percentage than what would be both wild card teams at this point, but currently second in the American League West. So the wild card teams of the Cleveland Indians and the Baltimore Orioles, they have winning percentages of 556 and 533. They're both better than the Rangers at the 6th seed at 438, which is kind of fascinating, and based on the National League, I think could actually happen this year. Now, what does this mean for the matchups? If you're going strictly in order, you go 1 through 8, you would get the Athletics and the Orioles. That would be a sweep, in my opinion. Oakland, I think, would cruise through there. You'd get the Yankees and the Indians, which would be one of the most fascinating best-of-5 baseball series in a long, long time. I mean, the fact that the Indians are currently behind the Tigers with that rotation that they have. Now, again, they're a couple of guys short because of bad decisions, like we've talked about a couple of times today. But if that's at full strength, that rotation against the offensive Cleveland, oh man, I would pay money to watch that one. So that one's going to be primetime TV and a heck of a matchup. Next, you would have the Twins facing off against the Texas Rangers in the 3-6 matchup. Minnesota, it looks, would advance very quickly beyond Texas there. And then in the 4-5, you would have the Tigers versus the Rays. So you would have the Rays, in my opinion, moving on. So basically, you would have Athletics, Indians, Yankees would be a good one, Twins, Rangers. So some of these matchups aren't providing the best ultimate interactions when it comes to the playoffs. But if you're telling me I'm getting Indians, Yankees based off of where things currently fall, I'm going to sign up for that anytime. So I currently like the expanded playoffs. Once again, I mean, the only one at this point would be the Texas Rangers to be a true disappointment. Your second wild card team, even with the added teams here, would have a .533 winning percentage. I mean, if you think of it right now, if you just went 3-1-2, it would be the Tigers and the Rays at 600 and .556. And one team with a .556 winning percentage would ultimately be left out and wouldn't have the opportunity. So early on, obviously the Tigers would be a huge surprise. The Rangers would be a surprise. Even though they're under 500, they'd qualify. And then the Orioles. So 3 out of the 8 teams in the American League, I can say for sure, are teams that, as I previewed every division the past couple of months, I did not give them a high chance or a high probability to make the postseason. So I'm rooting for the Orioles, Tigers, and Rangers. Why the heck not? But, man, it'd be fascinating to see a team under 500 ultimately in the postseason. Looking at the National League now, it's a very similar story on the NL side of things. Your current division winners, surprises across the board here. Honestly, I would have been 0-3. I mean, you got the Chicago Cubs in the Central, the Colorado Rockies, and the Miami Marlins. I thought the Cubbies would have been done with. Their age is going to catch up to them. Those guys are getting older on the mound. They're not going to be able to perform like they have in years past. I thought you'd get a little more Chris Bryant out of everybody there. But he seems to be the only one who's really struggled for them. So the Cubbies at the top. Then you got the Colorado Rockies. Charlie Blackmon hitting 500. We talked about that. Marquis on the mound, really exceeding expectations. Fascinating to watch them currently advance over the Dodgers in the NL West. So the Rockies would win that division if it ended today. And then the Marlins, because they haven't played the same number of games as everybody else. Maybe ultimately they won't play the same number of games as everybody else. There's a chance that they only get to 50, 55, 52. I mean, look at the Cardinals. The Cardinals haven't played in 2 weeks. This is going to be the first time in a number of years where a team went 2 weeks in between regular season games and competing in Major League Baseball. It's fascinating what's going on. But you can't complain because, hey, it is what it is. Just deal with it. Nothing's going to be normal this year, like we've said. So, they're playing 50. They got a triple header today. So be it. Run it. Let's go. Have them play. I don't want to hear any complaining. But the Marlins, Rockies, and Cubs would be the craziest top 3 in NL playoff history, potentially based on preseason expectations if the year were to end today. The runners-up looks more like what you thought the top may look like outside of the Padres, but the Braves and the Reds find themselves in the runner-up position. So the Padres would be number 1 with a .611 winning percentage, the Braves at .579, and then the Cincinnati Reds at .471. So once again, that second-place divisional team, there's one team there that's under 500. In the American League, it's the Rangers. In the National League, it's currently the Reds. And then you go to the wild card, where the LA Dodgers have a .611 winning percentage, which is tied for the 4th best winning percentage and is tied with the Padres. So if you want to put the Dodgers atop the division, or atop the number 2 spot, and then put the Padres in the wild card, either way, not a big deal. The way things are lining up, you're going to get a divisional matchup anyway. And then you get the Milwaukee Brewers as the last wild card team, currently with a .467 winning percentage. So you have 2 teams in the National League right now under 500. Your second runner-up in the Central, and yet your second wild card comes from the Central. So the East and the West, these teams are really under 500 if they're not in the top 2 is what this is telling me. And if you're looking at matchups, you'd have Milwaukee versus Chicago, number 1 versus number 8. We've seen that interdivisional matchup already a few times this year. It's been fun to watch. That would be an awesome postseason experience. Divisional games going at it, best of 5. Let's see here, number 2 versus the first wild card. Same story there in the National League. Whether it's the Dodgers and Padres, since they're tied, I wrote down the Dodgers for wild card purposes. They would face off with the Rockies, who would be the 2 seed. So once again, you would have 2 teams winning percentage .706 and .611 going off, facing each other in the first round of the postseason. That would absolutely have to be the highest winning percentage of teams facing each other in the first round, because with the standard procedure and the way it's been with the 2 wild cards, they're usually right around 500, and then everybody else is that advanced. So both teams aren't that good unless they're in the NLCS. But with the expansion, man, their records would be crazy to meet in the first round like that. Next up, you would have the Miami Marlins. If they're able to hang on, they would face off against the Cincinnati Reds in the 3-6 matchup. That would be a fascinating matchup off the top. We talked about Cincinnati's rotation, how they have the top 3 strikeout guys in the National League, average just about 9 strikeouts per outing. They're a game under 500. That offense hasn't figured it out outside of Castellanos, and the Marlins pitching isn't half bad. The Marlins lineup is surprising people. Aguilar, Villar through the middle of it, they've been good. So we'd see that pitching going up against the Marlins. I would take Cincinnati in that matchup over the course of the series there. And then you would have the Padres and the Braves in the 4-5 matchup. That would be a fascinating matchup. The Braves, they are expected to ultimately win the NL East eventually over the Marlins, so those would change based on winning percentages. They're tied for first place, but the Marlins have a much higher winning percentage due to less games. So even if you flip them, maybe you get the Marlins and the Padres, and then you're getting the Braves and the Reds. Either way, both of those series would be fantastic to watch. So give me the Cubbies over the Brewers. I mean, personally, I'd take the Dodgers over the Rockies in what would be an upset right now. The wild card Dodgers over the 2-seed Rockies. And then Marlins, Reds, I'd go Reds. Braves, Padres, go Braves. And you're looking at 5, 6, and 7 advancing on in the National League out of the top 8. So 3 upsets is what I'm giving it. I'm going 1, 5, 6, and 7 based on the current layout. Man, that would be fascinating to see coming down the stretch ultimately. And, again, still making some predictions here, wrapping things up. That's how the playoffs would end. So for the past, the last couple minutes here of the show, the Yankees and Rays in the AL East, they're starting to stabilize themselves. The Twins and Indians, the AL Central is fantastic. The Tigers, I don't know how long they'll hang around. The White Sox are good. The AL West outside of Oakland, man, Houston is really struggling. Ryan Presley blew another save the other day, so their bullpen, Ozuna, Presley dealing with concerns and injuries. I don't think they're going to turn it around anytime soon. And the National League East, everybody outside of Atlanta is under 500 or will be, in my opinion. I think Miami eventually falls off once they get into the grind, start playing better teams. The Cubbies, 11-3, 4.5 games up already. Wow, that's the biggest lead in the division across the board. Even in the AL West, it's 4 games. So the Cubbies really establishing themselves. And then out west, can the Padres keep it up? Can the Rockies keep it up? The Giants and D-backs aren't that far behind. I think it's going to be a fascinating next couple of weeks up until the trade deadline like we talked about. So really, that's what you're looking at over the next couple of weeks. Who's going to get traded for what? Can Blackmon continue to hit 400? Can he hit 500? Where's he going to finish? He was 0 for 9. Now he's hitting 576. It's crazy here. But wrapping up today's episode of the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Recording here Wednesday, August 12th for you guys to listen to Thursday, August 13th. I appreciate you guys tuning in. I'll ask you on the way out here, if you haven't done so yet, head to Apple Podcasts, head to Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, all of the above. Please rate and review the Baseball Podcast. If you haven't checked out the other podcasts within the network as well, please check those out. If you're into politics, news, cars, books, reality TV, sex, whatever it is. If you want to listen to a podcast, try to learn a little bit, better yourself, type those into the search bar, GSMC Podcast. You'll see all of the options and availability that we have within the network pop up for you. And then also head to social media, like I said, Facebook, Twitter. Please check those out. Please give us a like, a rate, subscribe, a follow, everything you guys do. But you guys are the best out there. I appreciate you listening as always. That'll wrap it up for today's episode. I'll talk to you guys again late Sunday night for Monday of next week. So do me a favor and enjoy the weekend. Try to get out there, watch some baseball. I know I will. I'm enjoying the heck out of it. But we'll talk to everybody again soon. I am Kevin Mahalik with the GSMC Baseball Podcast.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast. part of the Golden State Media Concepts podcast network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts podcast network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.